What's up, boopers? Ashes of Creation just lifted a verbal NDA on their Alpha 1 test that they had this past weekend, which means I can talk to you guys about my experience with the Alpha 1 and kind of give you an idea of what state the game is actually in and what to expect when the full NDA is lifted in about a month or two, where streamers are going to be able to actually show you the gameplay footage. Now, I'm not going to focus too much on the bugs and the lack of polish in some areas, because that's expected. Remember, anything I say, you can take it with a grain of salt, because this is Alpha 1 testing. However, the foundation for a lot of the game systems that Steven Sharif and Intrepid Studios has talked about is in the game. So we can talk about how those systems are working and how they feel. I want to primarily focus on combat and things like that. Now, I will say that the focus of this test seemed to be around network infrastructure and connectivity issues. There were a lot more Alpha 1 testers. The Alpha 1 pack recently went back on sale, myself included. I was one of the new guys who just came into the party. And so the first day or two, we were having a lot of issues with just logging in the game, getting stuck on loading screens, creating characters, connecting to servers, and then in the server, there was a lot of rubber banding. But I was really impressed how communicative the team was through the whole process, so it didn't really feel frustrating. They completely updated us whenever something was being shut down, a server was going up, a server was restarting, things like that. And overall, over the course of the weekend, I think by the second or third day, most of the rubber banding issues were completely gone, which was a good thing because you didn't really get a feel for how the combat was supposed to be with all of the lag. Like, the monsters weren't using abilities, you could just group a bunch up and attack them and they wouldn't even fight back because of the lag. So I want to talk about a few of the main systems here. I'll start by talking about the positives. So first of all, the questing system that's in the game is really good. I don't like the style of questing that recently MMOs have adopted, where they focus an entire expansion around a single storyline. There's side stories and stuff, but you're mainly focused on this one big bad boss, because that is a single player kind of RPG story, and not even a very good one, where it's a stagnant linear path towards the end goal, and that's all really the entire expansion is focused on. That's been a theme for basically all of the Final Fantasy XIV, WoW, and ESO expansions lately. And what Ashes of Creation does, which nobody really has been talking about much yet, is it creates isolated stories and incidents within the game world to help develop the world's story, which is something you need when you're making an MMORPG that's based on something without a pre-established IP. You need to establish your world for the players and get them invested in it. And there isn't some big bad guy or anything. The ultimate story of Ashes of Creation is exploring a new world kind of thing. But let me give you an example. There is an expedition that pops up when you level up a node, where there's just a tiny camp that forms outside a set of ruins, right? So you just stumble across this camp, there's no indicator on the map, and you see there's a few quest givers there. You talk to them, and eventually the leader will give you a quest to explore some nearby ruins. You start exploring the ruins, you find that there's some creatures there, and eventually you find another encampment, but it's empty. And then you read through the books there, and you find out that the encampment belongs to the NPCs that just gave you the quest. And then you start to realize there's some mist in the ruins that's making your memory foggy, and then you gotta go and tell them about it. So you go back to the quest givers, you're like, hey, you already had a camp there, and then you figure out there's something messing with people's memory. So then the next quest, you're kind of focused on removing the memory fog on yourselves to get back in the ruins. And then the next quest has you go back into the ruins and basically find the source of the memory fog and then destroy it. And that's a nice little closed quest chain that wraps up the story nicely, develops the area, and you get a sense of what's going on in that area, so that it's just not a random ruin set up on the side of the world. And it doesn't continue on to some greater story, it's just an isolated development of the world. And I really like that style of questing, and this was just one example. There were many patchwork quests like this all around the Alpha 1 starting area that developed sections of the world to kind of let you understand what's happening there, and what's valuable, what resources matter there, what creatures are going on there. I like it. I hope that they do that for all of Ashes of Creation. That questing style is perfect for developing a new world without a pre-established IP. It builds up the lore naturally without making the players feel like they're on a roller coaster ride, just visiting all the stops that they're being sent to. So that's the questing. In terms of the crafting, it's basically bare bones. We can't really comment on that yet because we didn't really get to dig into the nitty-gritty. You can gather stuff and you can craft stuff, but it's very rudimentary and basic, and they've said before that they haven't implemented the proper crafting and gathering systems yet, so no point commenting on that. The node system was working more or less. There isn't really any clear indication of how your nodes are leveling up. You can't really see an experience bar or what's making the experience go up. This is by design because I believe Intrepid doesn't want you min-maxing and metagaming how to level up your nodes. But the nodes were able to go up to level 3 on the test, and once you got a node to level 3, you could buy houses, you could buy mounts, and all of that stuff seemed to be working. Tiny bugs here and there, like a door not opening properly, or the doorway is too low and you can't really fit inside and stuff like that. But overall, it worked. Like, the foundations of these systems were already in place, which is what you want to look for in an Alpha 1 test, in an early phase of testing the game. The main thing I want to talk about, though, is combat. So, initially, when you enter the game, there are two styles of combat. There is action-based combat and there's tab target-based combat. You can switch between them very, very easily by just pressing the Z hotkey. I forgot about the Z hotkey thing, where you can switch. So, initially I was stuck in the tab target mode, and I got really bad first impressions from the tab target mode. It feels very, very clunky, especially with a melee fighter who has a frontal cleave, still having to target enemies to attack them with a frontal cleave. I hated it, but the moment I switched to action combat, it felt a lot better because I get a reticle, I can just aim where I'm swinging, and then I swing. My problem for the combat stems from the fact that it's using this hybrid model. So what I mean is, let's say I want to group up like 5 monsters as a tank. There is collision, so they bump into each other, but you can group them up enough that you can still use your cleave attack. So I'm cleaving them down, I'm hitting them with my AoEs, and then it comes time to use certain skills that are target-based. And it feels really clunky to make sure you have to target the right enemy using a reticle-based system. Sometimes it just felt odd to have to switch between using both sets of skills. You're not just using action-based skills. Even in the action-based combat mode, you still have to tab target them, and vice versa. Even if you're in the tab target mode, some of your skills seem targeted, but they're actually aimed, like a frontal cleave hitting everything in front of you, even though you're targeting a single monster. Maybe it'll grow on me if I use it more, but I would really prefer if they just went one direction or the other. The problem with this lies in the fact that some skills from monsters and enemy players are tab target based, meaning you cannot dodge them, but you don't really have a sense of what you can and cannot dodge right now. So for example, there's 2 types of monsters, I think it's the Scale Runner and the Troll, that just have a tab target style based knockdown. So you're trying to dodge roll out of it, I think? I mean, I don't even know if it's tab target. It could be action combat based knockdown. You don't know if you can dodge their knockdown or they're just tab targeting onto you. And in a game with a combat system like that, anything that's action oriented has a severe disadvantage, right? Because I've got to aim my knockdown and you just click on me and go, and I get stunned, I get knocked down or whatever like that. Obviously, tab target might be needed for things like healers, where they need to target their companions and then right click them and then cast the heal. But when you're comparing using action combat to tab target and mixing and matching abilities, it gets really disorienting. And on top of that, there's not really a lot of visual clarity right now with the abilities. So there's not a clear indication of where a melee swing is hitting. You don't know what counts as being within your frontal cone and what doesn't. And you don't know where the enemy's attacks are hitting for the most part and stuff like that. So more visual clarity on where the abilities are hitting and some sort of indication that something is tab target. Maybe that comes naturally over time when you fight the same monsters, but I didn't really like the hybrid style. If I was just using the action combat style, if I was just commenting on that as a melee fighter, I really liked it. I really liked how it felt. I could group up monsters. It really felt at the same level as you'd expect from something like Elion, Terra, or BDO. Pull the monsters together, cleave them down, feels good, very impactful in terms of hitting the monsters that are in front of you. There wasn't really an indication, as I said, of where my melee attacks would hit, but you kind of get a feel for it over time. Sometimes you're missing things you think you should have hit because it looks like it's right in front of you, but I guess the radius of your abilities are smaller. I would just like for the game to tell me where my stuff is hitting rather than have me guessing, so I don't have that frustrating feeling of missing and thinking, was that lag, or was I just not close enough, was it the wrong angle? When you don't know, it's just hard to grow and learn as a player, and it's just kind of a guessing game. When we move away from the basic combat though, if I start talking about the raid bosses, you can see in some of the developer updates, there's dragons that are flying around. Those are in the Alpha 1, you can fight them. We put together a small group and we fought the poison dragon, which is shown in the latest developer update. And I like the way that they're handling bosses so far. basically, if you fight the boss, like if you don't watch the video and you just run in and fight the boss, you see the mechanics, you can kind of figure out how to beat the boss in 1 or 2 tries. And I think that's a good style for a raid encounter. It's kind of like the level of difficulty you'd expect in late classic World of Warcraft raids, and a lot of people would initially react to like, ugh, that's too easy. But that level of difficulty is enough, honestly. I think the level of difficulty for raids kind of went over the top from Blizzard and Final Fantasy XIV because they know that people are using add-ons with timers and shit like that and studying university level degrees to fight certain mythic bosses. Like, I have to be here at this time and use this item and then blah 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 blah. That's not really intuitive. It doesn't really feel natural. Running into a raid boss a few times and dying as you learn its mechanics is okay, but you should be able to, without any outside help, be able to beat a boss just by trying it and figuring it out. You shouldn't need add-ons and stuff like that. And if you get to a point where you do need outside programs and third-party assistance to fight bosses, I think that's a little bit too much. I think the developers maybe went too far in trying to challenge the player base. I think this is part of the reason why mythic raid bosses are a little bit feel a little bit exclusive, right? They're meant for only the super hardcore players, and everyone else just has to sit back and watch their streams as they race to world first. But that's not what you should shoot for. I think you should try to be more inclusive to the whole player base to be able to experience those things rather than only experiencing dumbed down difficulty versions of them. So I like the raid encounters at this difficulty level. Obviously, they should be punishing in their mechanics so that if you do mess up their simple mechanics, you straight up die. But I think that's enough. And one thing that I really liked about the boss is it had a jumping skill. So the poison dragon, when he jumps on his puddles, he releases a shockwave on the ground and you have to jump over it. This tells me that the combat system is very, very robust because something that detects elevation over rather than just detecting where players are over a flat plane means that they already have that sort of capabilities in the foundation of their combat system, which means they can implement other skills and abilities related to elevation and stuff like that. So dodging flying projectiles through the air rather than just sliding on the ground, stuff like that is really, really cool for me. I believe they use that when it comes to siege weapons, when they're throwing catapult bolts and stuff like that. That makes me think that even though this is basically an indie developer making an MMORPG from the ground up, it's using advanced calculations for their combat system, none of that simple, basic bitch bullshit. And that makes me look really forward to what sort of skills we're going to see. We saw a lot of examples of different types of skills through the 3 classes that were present. There was the tank, the cleric, and the mage. We didn't see any sort of skill around like putting down traps on the ground or any skill that showed how monster taming or summoning pets would work. But basically you get examples of every other type of skill. There were charge skills, there were leash skills, they were all functioning pretty well, occasionally bugs with them, and those type of skills, specifically charge skills, are pretty difficult to implement. It doesn't seem like it, but finding a path between 2 points on a player and a monster and then rushing the character there without screwing up the animations or getting anybody stuck in the ground is pretty tricky. You need to have a nice pathing system in your game, and it worked well. So I'm excited to see as they expand on these systems, what other skills they put in the game and what more functionality comes into the game. The only other major concern I would say I had for Ashes of Creation was the pathing issues. So Ashes of Creation has an open world MMORPG with a realistic art style. When you're trying to go for a realistic art style and you're trying to make the world look natural with the trees and the rocks and the bushes, you can't really have like right angles and flat surfaces there to indicate where players can and cannot walk. As a result, you can more or less jump on really odd surfaces and in some cases not jump on them. For an example, there's a little bit of a cave with jumping puzzles where you have to get to certain flowers on ledges within the cave, and there are just weird curves and angles to the rocks that you're supposed to be able to climb on. And in some situations, it looks like you can jump up and you can't. In other cases, it looks like you can't jump up and you can't. And then you start sliding on slopes that don't look like they should make you slide down. And there's just not a lot of visual clarity about where the characters are supposed to be able to stand in the game world and where not. Like, can I jump on those blocks? Can I jump on that ball? Can I jump on those logs, those rocks, those things like that? Can the monsters go up and down those, or will they bug out? Will they get stuck in the ground if I try to lead the monsters up those objects? It's really, really messy, and I think it's going to get worse when they add flying into the game, because once you add flying, then basically players can land on any object or terrain or surface in the game world that they want to. And when you give that ability to them, you really got to plan out what people can stand on and what we cannot stand on, and there needs to be some clarity on that, because it's going to lead to a lot of issues where people are shooting at you from atop rocks, from a flying mount position that they obtained, and you just can't get to them unless you have like a leash from a tank or something. And I don't know, I'm a little bit concerned about this because there was a lot of issues with it in this test, a lot of padding issues in terms of going into fight up. There's like cute bunches of birds that are sitting on top of rocks, and I wouldn't dare engage them because I have no idea how they're going to behave. Are they going to slide down the rock? Are they going to hop off the rock? Are they just going to get stuck in the rock? What's going to happen? There was a case of a little goblin village with a lot of goblins on different floors, and you went in there and you tried to hit the goblins, and they're all like walking through the walls and stuff like that, and going up and down the stairs, and it just feels a little bit off right now, the terms of how the enemies are behaving with elevation, and I'm a little concerned about how easy it's going to be as a player playing the game to tell what I can jump on and what I can't jump on when I actually start fighting these monsters, like tiny little rocks and bones and all this stuff that juts out of the ground. Sometimes you can get on top of them and bug out the monsters and attack them from up there. Sometimes you're just sliding down and there's no real rhyme or reason to it. It's hard to explain this, but when you start playing the game and you start experiencing this, when you start experiencing it yourself, you'll know what I'm talking about. So this is a difficult issue to solve because I think you need to plan your whole level design around it when you're putting all these beautiful objects in the game, either scaling them up to make it very clear that you're not supposed to jump on them, or just making them more sloped and stuff like that. And it needs to be sort of a uniform design to make it feel much more intuitive when you're traveling the world, to just know where you can and cannot go. If they're trying to make it so that you can go everywhere, then all the power to them, but that's going to be a little bit tricky when it comes to padding the monsters and stuff like that. The last thing I want to talk about is the death experience. So this is a hot topic for the other testers that have been complaining about it. If you die in Ashes of Creation Alpha 1, you'll get something called experience decay. Which basically means that you have to pay a deficit of experience before you can start gaining new experience. So if I die once, I'll get 10% experience decay. It means I need to gain 10% of my level's experience before I can start earning experience again. And on top of the experience decay penalty, you will also lose 50% of whatever you're carrying at the time of your dying. I think this is a bit harsh, but that's the sort of game that Ashes of Creation is going for with the punishment on death. The experience decay, I feel, can build up to ridiculous levels. So you can lose your whole inventory after dying 2 or 3 times and it's fine, it's just gone. But the experience decay just keeps on building up the more you're dying. And if you're trying to challenge a raid boss or a dungeon or fighting in PvP over time, that can get to insurmountable levels, to the point where you're like at 1000% experience decay, meaning you would have to gain the equivalency of 10 levels just to start getting experience again. And at that point, it feels like you might be better off just making a new character. And when it gets to that point, it feels kind of bad. So my suggestion to the system would be to introduce an alternative way to clear your experience decay rather than just grinding through it. So if somebody dies from pulling too many monsters or something like that, they can just grind through it. But if they die and they build up too much decay, you should give them the alternative to maybe rest to get rid of it, like a pseudo rested experience. So for example, going back to your freehold, doing some crafting, farming, sleeping in a bed, or sitting in a tavern, and letting the experience decay kind of wear down naturally, maybe even if logging off does the trick. That way there's another option, so you don't feel like it's game over when your experience decay just gets too high. But otherwise, I think the experience decay does have a place in the game, so I wouldn't complain to have it removed outright. But yeah, that's basically all the main things to talk about. I can go into the nitty-gritty details of more stuff, but most of it, like I said, tiny bugs here and there with the UI and just lacking polish, and that's something you should expect in an Alpha 1 test. And overall, my experience was pretty positive. I'm really looking forward to Ashes of Creation. I was surprised to see how many of the systems are already functioning in the game, and they're working the way Steven and Intrepid have led us to believe they should be working. There's no wool being pulled over our eyes. What you see in the developer updates is exactly what we're playing, down to the 4K graphics and everything looking beautiful. This game is real. This game is coming. It's not a pipe dream, and even though it still needs some work, it's on the boat to victory. So I'm excited to see how they continue to progress. I'll continue to test, and if they continue to lift verbal NDAs, I'll give you guys my impressions of what is going on in the current state of the game. But that's it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and all that good YouTube stuff. I'll be covering more Ashes of Creation. I might do some TBC stuff. I got some more Alien stuff planned, and I also have plans for my own tiny little mini MMORPG, as you guys seem to have been very, very interested in that. So look forward to that soon. But Until next time, guys, have a great day, and I am pooping out.